Imagine walking into a kitchen for the first time and you're seeing sugar, eggs, flour, a lot of ingredients. And at the end of the day, that needs to turn into a cake. Android development is exactly the same way. And at first, Android Studio can seem overwhelming. There's view models, there's UI, there's Jetpack Compose, state management, and everything you would think of in building that mobile app you try to build. Gradual issues. You try to run an app, it fails, it crashes. Android development feels exactly the same way. And instead of creating a desert cake, you create a disaster. Especially for the beginners. It seems harder than baking a cake because there's one thing you're missing: the right recipe. And in this course, we will be using the official Android documentation to build and learn. Think of Android Studio as your kitchen. Think of good architecture as your recipe. And by the way, we will be following the official Android documentation to build the right recipe. But for Unit 1 of the patch pathway, we get to introduce our kitchen. We want to understand all these ingredients. Where do we start from? And we're going to make sure that your baking journey, that is building mobile apps, is easier for you by referencing the right documentation. No guesswork. No more videos. No clicking everywhere. You and me in the Android official documentation, we are going to build the basics the right way. So, grab your apron and let's bake some apps. I'll see you in your kitchen. Oh, so, and by the way, if you are new to Android development, worry less. You have the right recipe. You just need to have a computer that can run Android Studio. So, let's get started with some cakes. Code. So the first thing you need to know is we will be following the official Android documentation, which is the developers.android.com. So you should be redirected to this page of developers.android.com. So this will be our base guideline for building mobile apps. So if you go to Under Essentials, there is training courses. And under the training courses, the course that we will be building upon or guided by will be these Android Basics with Compose. So remember, Compose is your recommended toolkit for building your mobile apps by the Google Android team. And most of the teams are now adopting or have adopted to Jetpack Compose. So we will be following these pathways. So in our Unit 1, we get to cover your first Android app. And instead of the first Android app, so we will be doing an introduction to Kotlin. We will be setting you up and running for Android Studio and basics, building the basics layout within your first app. So in this section, we just focus on Unit 1. So let's get started. So we will be using a compiler. So a compiler is a tool that converts you into what a machine or your computer can understand. So in that case, for now, we will be using the Kotlin Playground. So if you just type in Kotlin Playground in your browser, you should see this and then click on it. You will be redirected to this. So in Android or in any programming language, we have things called functions. So a function allows you to have a predefined set of instructions which your computer will execute upon. So in Kotlin, we use fun keyword to define a function. And we have the entry point of any function in Kotlin is used by the main. So later on, we will come to understand that in Kotlin, we have something called keywords. And these keywords cannot be used. These are reserved words that cannot be used elsewhere, or maybe using something called variables, which we will learn in our next pathway. But just understand that for you to define a function, you will need to use this. So you cannot say maybe something like function. No, this is predefined for another programming language, called JavaScript and any other language. Okay, so once you've defined this, so just let me to zoom this a little bit. So once you've defined this fun, we have your entry point, that should be the main. Then we have something called the opening and closing curly brackets. So this will be your function definition. This is a must. So in short, what we're saying is function main, and this is exactly how you should define your functions. So there's something called defining a function and calling your functions. So defining your functions is actually the starting point of, it's just like saying, hey, introducing yourself. And then someone else can use your name to maybe say, hey, can you get me something? So your function definition at all points should have this. This is a must, and this cannot be something like func. You see, it's already not highlighted. So if you see it's highlighted, remember this is a keyword, and you cannot say maybe master. No. So for a function, it has to follow the naming conventions and the already predefined keywords, and the entry point will be main for our application. And then we have these two opening and closing curly brackets. So this is where our inputs goes here. So some of the functions later on, you will come to understand that they take in inputs, and when they are being called, like I said, there's defining and there's calling. When they're being called, you need to pass arguments or wherever you had already defined here. There is the body. So you have something called the body. So all your instructions to this function will go inside here. So for now, just make sure that you've mastered this, or not really cramming, but you've mastered that. For you to define a function, you will need the func keyword, main as the entry point of that function, opening and closing curly brackets, which will indicate the start and the end of your function body. So here we can say maybe something like if it was maybe any instructions, or maybe something like playing football. So it's saying something maybe kick the ball, maybe say call the captain. So these are the set of instructions that will be executed by this function. So again, you can see this in green line indicates that these are comments. So if you see this double slash, or there will be other ways of commenting out your code, you will be able to use the double forward slash or the forward slash and the asterisk, which we will later on learn this. So for now, just understand this is how our function should be defined. So if you notice, the next thing here is the print line. This is already a function, just like we have this function here. So this is another function being called within the functions. You can still call functions within functions. And if we do run this now, I want you to note something here. So it's now printing hello world. But how is this happening? So you remember inside this, we said this is a function that's going to print something on the user. So if maybe we change it to, let's say, hello teams, and run, it's going to do that exactly. So what it means is we've told the compiler, hey, I need you to print teams. Don't print now the previous hello Android. Yes, so if you now run, you get the same output. You can as well duplicate this. So don't worry more about the print line. Just know that this is a function that tells our computer to print something on the output. That's why it's called print. And we can duplicate this. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. So let's see what the output will be. So if you run, you see now it's doing exactly what you told it. I want you to print hello Android in two separate lines. So new this one print it ln is the next line. So if you can now say print maybe teams here, and then maybe this one you can say Android, just Android. So if you now run this, you see that we have printed Android and hello teams at the same time. Now, the next thing I would want us to do is, at some point, you will be trying to run something or execute some code, and there will be probable errors. Now, for a function like print line, it has to follow this structure. This opening and closing brackets indicates that this is the start and the end of the function. So anything inside here will exactly be shown on the screen. So what happens if, so let's first remove this. So what happens if we omit this? Let's see. You see now we have something called the syntax errors. Now, it's expected that while writing your code, you will be facing these kind of errors. And how do you exactly troubleshoot this? So in the world of programming, we have different kind of data types, which we will later on understand them. But for now, okay, let's remove this and now print. Let's see. And resolve reference Android. So anything that you need to output it like a name or anything you need to show on the screen must come between your opening and closing quotation marks. So if you now run, we see we have Android. So if we omit this and run another one, function invocation print line expected, so that is an error. So you must understand that this must come between these two. If you now run the app should work fine. So what happens if we substitute this with this and run the app? You see, now we have a whole problem. But of importance, I want you to note here is saying function main must have a body. Remember, we said the start and the end of a function must be declared by the opening and closing brackets, curl brackets. So if you now run, we are good. Now, the next thing could be we have something called the naming or the code style conventions. Just like how you would want to organize your room, there's the way we need to organize our code. So here, as you can notice, we have some spaces here and some spaces here. So this exactly follows the Android indentation. So indentations are the spaces between your code and your definitions. So you can see here we have some space, so we cannot just have this just there. It will run, but it doesn't follow the conventions. So it requires you to add some spaces here. And also, if you notice, we have space here and we have space here. We cannot say function main as one word or have this as this way. No. So we must follow the standard. So remember, while defining your functions, follow the spaces here, the indentations, and the 4 lines indentations with as the within the body here. So now that we understand how a function should work, so if you head to your Android documentations and go to your introduction to Kotlin, I want you to go to your first Kotlin program and then take the lab. I want you to scroll to the exercises. So there are quite a number of exercises I have for you. So I want you to copy these. So we can just begin with the first one here. So let's copy that, and then we're going to replace them here. And then let's just run this. You can see we're printing 1, 2, 3. We can just do one for you. You cannot do here. So I'm going to run the code. So let's see if it will execute properly. So we have Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, and Monday. And the question was, fix the program so that the output prints Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. One thing I forgot to mention is, while executing your functions, instructions will be followed in order. So this one will be printed first, followed by this one second, third, fourth, and fifth. So for Monday to be printed as the first item, we will need to move this. I'm just going to cut it and paste it here. Yes, and then run our code. Now we should be able to have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Before you head to the solution, just pause the video, try to solve these exercises, and then come back once you are done. So the first one was, can you read the code in this program? So I'm just going to paste that. So print, run. So that is printing okay. So the second exercise was use Kotlin program. Use the Kotlin program to create the program that outputs the following message. So this one just going to, I am learning Kotlin. So I'm just going to copy this. So remember we said in print, so if you run our program, we should be able to see the output. So the way it is. So the next exercise was copy and paste the following program, fix the problem. So we just come here, copy and paste, just gonna zoom back a little bit and then run the program. So we have Tuesday, so we were to solve this, just move this to there and then run. So you should be able to fix that. So the next one was fix the problem. So we just go back here, copy and paste everything here and run. So it's expecting a closing. So it's already telling you where the problem is. So just do this and make sure that we have closed the function problem. The function body, tomorrow is rainy, it's printing okay. Fix the problem of the desired output here. So we again copy and paste and then run the program. And solve reference print line. There's nothing like print line. So the reserved keyword for printing statements in Kotlin is print line. So if you are able to solve that, then you should be able to find the problem. to solve the problem. So again, we just come here and copy, says fix the program so that it produces the desired output. Print it and solve reference print line. Now remember, when running code, it's important that everything stays in a new line. So otherwise, the compiler won't know if this is the end of maybe your work. So you as a human being knows this means print this, this, but the compiler doesn't know when this line has ended. So we need to put everything in a new line. So once we run now, we should be able to get the output. So the next problem was just fix this, copy here, select and paste, and then run the program. So the function main must have a body. So remember, within our function basics, we say that the body, the curly brackets indicates the start and the end of the body. So just going to remove that and quickly just do this. Then we're going to run the program. And boom, we are there. Welcome back. So in this series, we get to focus on what we call a variable. So a variable, as we said, is a container or a box that allows us to store a value, that holds a value for us, so that when we want to retrieve it, we just call the labeling on that box and we will get our values. Now, in Kotlin, there is a reserved keyword for defining a variable. So we have val, and as you can see, they are highlighted. So I want you to know something. So we will be later on understanding how things work. But for now, we want to focus on val. So we use val and we pass in a name of the variable and a data type. So here we need to pass in the data type. Now, again in Kotlin, there's definition of variable and assigning the values. So sometimes they're used interchangeably. But for our case, just know that this is the standard of defining and assigning a default value to a variable. So if you want to print maybe this name here, then instead of now using this string literal or string values here, and then you can just say print name. But now our name is not defined because we've commented out our code. So the other thing could be later on we'll cover about commenting out code. So for this case, just be sure, just see, we have a val. This is the starting point of your declaring your variables, and then the name of that variable. So maybe we can say we want to check on something like age. And then remember again in the name in the coding convention, so we need to add space between the data type and the variable name. Now, we've talked about data types. So in Kotlin, we have data type with strings. So we have integers, we have float, and we have doubles. So these strings, so any character that comes in between the quotation marks falls as a string. For integers, these are float numbers. These are numbers ranging from 1 to 9. And then for float values, so anything with maybe let's say 4.5 with a decimal and it's appended the F, that is a float. And anything a double is a decimal number, so maybe something like 4.50 without the F, so that will be a double. So for our case, age is always an integer, or maybe you can start off with the name, which is always of type string. So we can just remove this and just understand that we have strings, integers, float, and doubles. So I'm going to remove this. Now inside here, we've said that the name will come in between the strings, the double quotations. So we want to say the name is of type string. So with this, what we are trying to do here is we are trying to tell the compiler that for this variable, we are expecting a string value. And we can already add some values, but ideally, this is how you would define your variable. But if you need to assign a starting initial value, you need to use the assignment and the double quotation. So maybe Teams. Now, if we run this, we expect that Teams will be printed. It's just like saying print Teams. So let's just add your Teams on so that we differentiate the the exact thing here. So we are now saying print teams on in this. But if we extract this to a variable, we can then use the variable name to get the value, which is teams, just like we said. A variable is a container that holds a value for us. And for us to get that value, we need to call the name of that box or the name of that container, which is name. So we can just say here name. So if we print name, so we expect to now see teams. So if we need to change this value or update this value, we can just say teams on dev and then run it. So if you run it, you will see now we have teams on and dev. So the other thing would be updating this variable. So maybe we've printed teams, we need to add another one. So we can have another value. So let's say val age. So we've said now int, and then we say 10. So if you now print here age, we expect that we see the value 10. So remember, we are not adding the double quotes because, like we said, we have strings, integers, float, and double among other data types. So if we print this now, we're able to print 10. Let's talk about updating these values. So let's remove this. Let's work with age. So let's say teams has done one more age to now 11. We need to update teams to another value. So to update a variable, so we use the assignment. So you need to call the name and the initial value, and maybe let's say add 1. So we're going to say age equal to the age value, the initial value, which is 10, then we add 1. So then we add 1. So if you now run this, yes, there is a problem. So remember, we started off by saying with variables, you can either use val or a var. So this means this is an immutable state. So that means you cannot update it. But for you to use to update a variable, you will need to use var. So var will allow you to update this value. So if you now run this, we see now our age has been updated to 11. So there's also another simple way of updating your value. So instead of reassigning, so remember everything on the right is reassigned to this variable. Like we said, for the first time we said, assign the value 10 to this container, which is age. Now we're saying, starting with this age, add 1 and assign it to the latest value of age. So that's why we are now able to have 11. So the other thing we can do is we can also increment this value without having all these lines. So we can just come here and say age plus plus. So if you do age plus plus, so let's say maybe we had 15, we expect that now we're able to get a value of 16. So you can either use the shorthand way of updating the variables, or maybe the other reassignment part of getting the initial value and adding 1. The next thing we would want to cover is commenting your code. So if I do this and select command / control forward, I'm able to comment this, but there's multi-line way of commenting this. So instead of adding this double /, we can use the /, we can have the asterisk, and then we can say we want to end here. Sorry, this should come in here. As you can see, so just for some, so this one will also be an asterisk here. So this, even if we add so many print line here, just copy this, paste, everything that comes in here will be commented. So a / and an asterisk and an asterisk and a closing / means that the entire thing here is commented out. Yes, so that is everything you need to know for now about variables. So if you need more reference, you can go to the developers.android.com. So the final bit will be something called string literals. Now, imagine we need to do a sum of, so maybe let's say we have another variable holding our age. So we can say age 2. And by the way, if the compiler understands that if you assign an initial value, it will automatically know that this is an integer. So we have something called type inference, so you don't have to do that. You can also say just the same as age. So instead of saying age is an integer, the IDE will automatically understand that this is an integer. So if we do 15.5, it will automatically understand this is a double. So with type inference, you don't need to define the data type for that function. So maybe something like age and maybe score. So maybe you want to add these two and print that. So you can say score is maybe 10. So we want to do a summation of just variable. So we want to do a summation of these two. A variable, we want to add these two. So if we go to a compiler here, just performing quick math, so we can say age plus score, and then run the code. So if you see now, we are printing 25. So it's complaining because we are not updating this, so we can just have them as the immutable values like val. So let's just go with the val so that it doesn't keep complaining here. But if we wanted to print them inside, maybe let's say your total score is these two. So if we now say, just add this like we said. So maybe if we say total score, total count, let's say total count equal to age plus score. So if you run this, yeah, unfortunately, it hasn't given us the exact value we wanted. So for you to use this variable inside the inside a string, so we need to add the dollar sign before each of them. So for example, let's say we want to only call age. Then we will come here and say, let's say we don't want to perform your age is, we don't want to perform any math operation for now. Your age is, and then you say age. So if you run this, you see we are not getting the exact value. But for you to get the exact value, you will need to use the dollar sign. So if you now run this, you see now we are getting the exact value, which is 15. So if you need to combine these operations, this and this, so if you now say plus, let's say we total count, let's just update this to a count, then we say score. Let's see if it will give us 25 as expected. You see now the total count is 15 plus 10, but we have not really gotten the summation of both these count. That's because we need to update this the right string literals, calling them. So we will need to introduce this opening and closing curly brackets. So with this, the compiler is able to know that anything we need to perform operations for any value that comes here in between these two. So we're going to say, so we just need to add that and then run. Oh, sorry. So you see now our total count is 25. So we don't need to come here and say add another dollar sign. We have already said we have added this dollar sign to cover for both of these, and the curly brackets just to tell the compiler, hey, we need the total value for these two before you print. So if you now run again, you see everything is as expected. So maybe last one is, we can say is available equal to false. So let's also just print this small output here using a boolean. So boolean is always true or false, that is 1 or 0. So you can say is product available, and then like we said, we need to use the dollar sign while calling in variable names in strings. So we do this. You see, is product available? The answer is false. Yeah, so that is it for variables. So if you need to learn more, you can check out the Android documentation. So welcome back to another series of creating and calling functions. So function contains a set of instructions or a reusable piece of code that can be called multiple times. So we will understand how do you call the function and how do you define your custom function. So remember, in our first lesson, we talked about this, that functions are defined using the function keyword, and they have the main entry point of your function in Kotlin is main. So this is where your entry point of the application is. Then the opening, closing brackets, and then the opening and curl brackets to indicate the body of the function. Now imagine we have print line, let's say hello teams, and we run this. So we expect to have hello teams. So what if we want to copy this and then just paste it down here? So what if we wanted to print James? So we have print line, James, and this. So and these are happening within the core function, the main function. I'm calling it core because this is the entry point of any other. So if you want to call external functions or your modified functions, you can call them here. So how do we create a custom function? So I'm just going to close this. So remember, for functions, any function should start with function keyword. And we talked about naming our functions. I think we forgot to say functions are named using the camel case characters, meaning it's the first name should be a small letter and the respective names or the respective characters after this should start with a capital letter, maybe name, maybe something like student, school, grade. So you see it takes an approach of the camel case. So the first character being small letter, followed by the next word which should start with caps, and then the other one, and then the other one. So for this one, let's call it birthday greeting. So you can say birthday greeting. Remember again, function definitions should have these opening and closing brackets. And again, our opening and closing curl bracket to indicate the body of our custom function. So how do you call this function? So we are going to move this line. So just cut them and paste them here. So how do we print this inside the main function without saying, without using this approach? You see, we are printing these James and teams here. So if we delete that and run the app, you can see the output is clean and there's nothing. So to call a function, you take this, the function name and the function opening and closing brackets. I'm just going to copy this. And then inside here, I'm going to paste it. So let's run. And boom, you can see we now have James, hello teams and hello James. So that is matters about creating your first function, your first local function. So if you remove that and run, you see it's adjusting accordingly. So we can call this now multiple times here. So just do this. I'm just going to copy this and then paste it here again. So if we run now, we expect hello, this function to be called twice. The same thing if you can repeat to call it 3 times. So this saves a lot of work with reusability. So if you add so many instructions here, you don't have to keep duplicating and repeating the same things within the main core function. So I'm going to remove that and then move on to the next one. So the next thing we're covering is return types. Now, you can also use functions. You can store functions as variables. So remember we said variables are just containers that holds data for us. So we could ideally store this function here as a variable here. So we can say val greeting and assign it to our function here. So you see now, if you want to access this function, we can just come here and say we can now print greeting. So greeting, remember, using the assignment operator holds this function here, which by definition here it says print teams. So if we run our application, we expect that we are going to see greetings here. So that is hello teams. So you can see now we have hello teams. So in functions, we do have return types. So for this, if you don't specify your return type, so the format that it takes is the function, the name, your parameters here, your curly brackets, and by default, if you don't return anything, it returns a type of unit. So if we run our application, just going to now remove this. So if we run our application and say birthday greeting, run our application, it says hello teams. But if you hover your mouse here, it says redundant type, return unit type. So what is here? What this means is, instead of placing unit here, given it's the default one, default return type, you don't need to specify that, and you remove it and run. Our application should run well. So the other thing would be if you wanted to return maybe string type, so we come here and specify that our return type should be string. So if you now run our application, you can see we are missing a return type, because if your function returns as a definition of return type, you must return that using the return statement, which we can now say as our return type here. So what you can do is we can assign this into variables. So you can say val greeting equal to teams, and then we can return this. You can say return greeting. So if you now print this here, so we come and say print in a new line, and we run this, you can see now we have hello teams. So we are adding print here because there's no statement, there's no print statement here to tell our compiler that we are returning, we want to print to the console hello teams. So we are going to add this print line here and close it here. So if we wanted to add another variable here, is maybe age, and say age equal to 5 years. So we can return something in string. So remember we talked about a string concatenation. So we can say hello teams. So that should be and greeting. Hello teams, you are now. So we can just say, I can just remove this, or we can just leave it. You are now and age. So what this means is it's going to print this statement and include you are now and this variable here, which says 5 years old. So if we run this, we expect a complete statement saying, hello teams, you are now 5 years old. So you've seen we are able to reassign this data type into variables, and using return, we can access these variables and go to our main function and print them. Yes. So just going to zoom back a little bit. Yeah, so that is matters return data type for our functions. So the next thing is parameters. So our function could take in variables within its body. So for example, this one here, if we wanted to customize teams so that we don't have to always, if we duplicate and print this, we will always have teams as the default name and 5 years as the new age, as the age. So if we wanted to modify this so that we're able to change the name and the age, we will need to use parameters. And there's definition and there's calling. So when you are calling a function and passing in what you've defined here, we call that calling the function and passing the arguments. So for example, we're going to say name of type string. So remember, if anything, our name appears within the double quotation mark. So that means it's a string. So that's why within the function, we are saying we declare a variable name and define its type. So we must, at all cases, pass a string type. And to access this, we also need to use the $sign. So we're just going to say hello and name. So let's run our application. Just going to remove this and let's see what will happen. Now, it says no value passed for parameter name, and it's exactly showing us where the error is, because we've said when calling this function, which we've done here, we need to pass something. Something is missing, and what is missing is the name. So that's why it's complaining no value passed for parameter name. So we've declared that we've defined a parameter, but we are not passing the argument here. So we can say now James, and let's see what will happen. It says, hello James, you are now 5 years. So if we duplicate this, so I'm just going to copy this. We can now say here like Ian. So you see now we have hello James and hello Ian. So we are now achieving flexibility within our function definition, which is a good way of writing standard code. Now, what about the age here? So we can also add a multiple parameters, which again we will now call multiple arguments. So we can say now age of type integer. So we will need to define here, and now we need to reference this here, age and age there. So if we run our function, it's going to complain no parameter passed for age. So we need to now, because we've added multiple params and they're separated by a comma. So we need to say comma, so let's say 10, and now let's say 20. So we are not putting them in double quotation because we defined that we are expecting our parameter to have an integer. So if you run that, so you can see now James is 10 years and Ian is 20 years. That is something cool and amazing. And we are still, again, using the return type here to return this combined statement, which we've said we are passing in the greeting and we are passing in the age. Now, so what happens if we say we start with 10 and let's say James? So let's run and see what happens. This is the problem. So it's saying mismatch. It was expecting, the type is an int, but it was expecting a string. So remember, here we said the first parameter we wanted to pass here was a string, but now we are passing an integer. This will always cause an error. So to solve this, we have something called named arguments. So we have name here as a parameter and age as another parameter. So by default, the compiler will work under an assumption that always the first character here will be a string and the second parameter, the second argument will always be an integer. That's why it's complaining it was expecting a string but found an integer. So we have something called named arguments. So we can say here age. So if you want to, we use the assignment operation or the assignment operator. So we can say age equal to 10. And then here we can now say name assignment operator, we assign it to James. So if we run, we shouldn't face any issues. So that's why you're now able to see James and age is 10 years. So when you use named arguments, so the order of passing in your arguments doesn't matter. But if you leave them by default, the compiler will always work with the order of how you've defined them in your parameters here. So the other thing will be default arguments. So let's say you have a default name, like you always have John Doe as what's default name used by most of the developers. So we can say we can use an assignment operator or the equal sign to define a default parameter. So by default means we wouldn't necessarily pass it when calling the function. So we come here and say name of type string equal to, let's say, John Doe, but we can just call it JON for now. So if we run our code now, because we've defined here that the name should be James, it's going to print James. And we've defined here that it should also be Ian, it's going to print, and it's going to ignore this because it's going to work with what has been passed here. So let's see. As you can see, there's no John Doe, anywhere here. But if we remove this now and just remain with age, so let's run and see what happens. You see now we have John as our our argument which was passed here by default. So if you need to pass default parameters, you need to define them. Default arguments, you need to define them as parameters here. So the other thing would be you can also pass age as a default. So you can say when you are born, you have 0 years. Of course, you can't have 0. So maybe in one day, we can round it off to the next years in terms of 12 months. So if now we don't define this 10 here, so by default, we're expecting that 0 will be printed because we've told our compiler this should be printed. So if we run that, so you see now Ian has 0 years by default. Yeah, so that is everything regarding functions. So these are just the basics. So you can continue learning more, or if you want to learn more, you can go to your developers.android.com documentation and go through the functions. That is creating and using functions in Kotlin. Close on Unit 1. That should be Introduction to Kotlin Programming. So there's some Kotlin basic problems. So I want you to head to developers.android.com, go to practice problems, take the code lab, and read the instructions. So it's basically pretty simple, just simple collection of problems that we've been ideally seeing during the start of the application, during the start of the course. Yes, so for example, so let's take this number 2. So print messages. Tell friends what you've learned in this pathway. Can you write a main function that prints the messages below? So I'm just going to copy these. There's no copy here. Let me just do this. Copy and then go back to here. So then I'm going to remove this. So I'm going to run my program. So you can see now it's returning the output which the question asked here. It was saying, tell your friends what you've learned in the pathway. Then you can say function that prints messages in 4 lines. So we've duplicated that. So we can just take another random one, maybe default parameters, the one that we've just learned now. So this one says, Gmail has features that sends notifications to users whenever they log in, attempt is made on any device. In this exercise, you write a program that displays messages to the users with this message template. There is a new sign-in request on operating system for your Google account. And then there's some sort of instructions here and everything else. So let's just go to the output. Let's see what the user wants. So can you find a way to optimize the code in this information, with this information, so that it prints out this? So there's a new device sign-in request on a non-OS. So we have a non-OS, we have Windows, and we have Mac OS. So already in mind, we know that we will need to pass, in that function, we will need to pass the operating system as a string for this. So for your Google account, so this one is Google account, so there's nothing to change there. User, this email is different, this email is different, and this email is different. So to print the above message, replace the main function with implementation of this one. So I'm just going to copy this, then take it to our environment here and paste it here. So I'm going to close this one. So it's saying here function main, first user email ID. This is the default one. The following line of code assumes that you named your parameter as email ID exactly. And then if you named it differently, feel free to update the name. So I'm just going to remove these comments here. So the first one will be print display alert message. Email ID is the first user email ID, then just add a space. Then the second one is operating system with another user email. The third one is displaying the alert message with operating system and the email ID. Then same thing for the third one. So there's a lot of repetition here. So we can create a function just to eliminate all these things here and get the exact output as it is. There's a new sign-in request for the operating system and the Gmail. So we can just copy this one line. And then we now go back to our IDE, just paste it outside here. Let's just comment it out to avoid it bringing errors. So we're going to delete everything here. Actually, let's just remove everything here. I'm just going to rewrite it. So first thing is to create our custom email, our custom function. So I'm going to say function. Let's call it Gmail notification. So the things that are changing here is the operating system. So we can say operating system of type string. So we want to pass the string. And the other thing that was changing was the user email. So you can just say user email of type string. So we can add a return type here. So it's going to return string, and then we open the opening brackets and closing bracket for our function. So for this, we want to return this entire statement here. So we're just going to copy this, just cut it and say here, return this. So we want to put it in double quotation. So return this statement here and say, yeah, so remove that space, just trying to format things here to look good. Now it's saying there's a new sign-in request on unknown OS. So this one, if you go back to our practice here, it's saying you have unknown OS, Windows, and Mac OS. So we're going to say here unknown OS. We're going to replace this one with the argument that will be passed here, that is the operating system. And then for the email account here, we're going to say and user email account. So this is the entire function in simple terms. So we're going to say now here, print, and a new line, we want to call this a Gmail notification with the passed parameters here. So I'm just going to copy this and pass this one here. And remember, we defined this these parameters here. So we need to call these arguments here. So the first one was on operating system. The first one was to say unknown OS. So I'm just going to copy this and then paste there. Then the Gmail one was the first Gmail account was user Gmail. Then come and paste it there. So again, this is a string, and we don't need that. So if you now run, you see there's a new sign-in request on unknown OS for your Google account ABCD. So we can duplicate this, just copy that. I think it was to be 3 times. Windows, and then Mac OS, we add user 2 and user 3. So if you now run our application, we should see the exact output as what had been requested here. Yeah, so you can continue, pause the video and solve the remaining problems. So once you're done, there is the solution code to help you if you get stuck. So for example, if you go back to our email, of course it was the longest one. Where is it? Yeah, yes. So actually it's exactly the same as our function. So see, this is the function that this is the solution to the function. So the only thing is just the different variable names. Everything else is the same. Yes. So make sure you finish that, and then we will now be moving from using the Kotlin playground to now interacting with Android Studio. Congratulations! You've just completed pathway 1 of the unit 1. That is the Kotlin functions foundations. You now understand the language Android apps speak. You've learned a lot, and congratulations. After this, you can take a small coffee break and we will be back for chapter 2. That is where we start building real things. Now we stop from learning the theory, that is our recipe, to now stepping into the kitchen to build mobile apps. We will be moving to Android Studio. This is where things get exciting. You now build a real app and you can actually run it in your mobile device. So take a moment, celebrate your success, and see you in pathway 2, where we get to build real mobile apps that run on real phones.